Hey everyone, Ashley Mailloux here with Mike Beer from the Daily Racing Forum. We're going to take a look at the Pick 5 sequence on Breeders' Cup Saturday out at Santa Anita Park. It's going to kick off with race number 7, the Breeders' Cup Distaff. And overall, Mike, I thought this was a great betting sequence. I think there's races to certainly spread for me more on the turf side of things in the Classic, but the talent is certainly there within each 5 races of this sequence.
Yeah, really, really good horses, really good competitive races to lead on. And I think you're right. The middle 3 legs, the 2 turf races, feel like, offer up some opportunities maybe for some prizes. We'll hope anyway. And we'll see how that Classic all shakes out. The big defection earlier today hurts the race a little bit, but maybe it just makes it a little bit more bettable.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a couple of races, alluding to the Breeders' Cup Classic. But looking at the Distaff mile and an eighth on the main track, a really good field of 11 assembled here. Idiomatics 5-2 on the morning line, but there's some other horses coming off of nice wins, such as a Dare Manor, and a couple of other horses that maybe are looking to get back on track. And to me, one of those horses appears to be Clairiere.
Yeah, we'll see if she can rebound here. I guess that would be the real question of the race, because I feel like everybody knows that Clairiere is good enough to win this thing. If she can bounce back to a better performance here, you just have to go back to her last race at Saratoga, where she caught, really wet track, and it just didn't really seem like she liked it at all and didn't fire. Otherwise, her form is rock solid.
Speaking of another horse with rock solid performances as of this year, 7 for 8 is the number 4 Idiomatic. We'll take a look at that most recent win in the Grade 1 Spinster at Keeneland. Only faced 5 other rivals in this field, Mike, but she ends up being much the best. And while she's not a need to lead sort of type, she does not need the lead to win. She got it quite easily here and continued to open up on them in the stretch.
It's a really good point that you make there. I mean, because you're right. I don't think she needs the lead to be effective. It just so happens that in her 2 most recent starts, and they're 2 very fast races, she just got absolutely loose and took no pressure either time. And so you just sort of wonder in some ways, how much does it dress her up? This pace is supposed to be much more competitive. She's not the only one in here who's coming in off of a bunch of easy trips on the lead. So does that change in this race? Does it affect these horses in a negative way and like sort of bring other horses into it? I mean, I think it's the really big question of the race.
It is, and there's also the battle always, even this is a 2-turn race of East Coast versus West Coast speed. And another horse that's been forward, we'll take a look at the most recent win for the number 5, a Dare Manor, who typically also finds herself out of the gate on the front end. And she only hooked 3 other rivals in the Grade 2 Zenyatta, but in some ways, this almost is like a paid workout for this 4-year-old daughter of Uncle Mo. She's going to open up on this field and make things pretty simple in the end.
We've been seeing a lot of this from a Dare Manor this year since she's rejoined Baffert. Poor Desert Dawn. All she can do is chase this horse to no avail in her last 3 starts. Maybe Desert Dawn gets the better setup this time. I don't know. I kind of wanted to stay positive on a Dare Manor, if only because I thought maybe she was the one who could fall through the cracks a little bit here. I've just kind of always liked her, and I really appreciate that Baffert's gotten her back into good form.
Yeah, and you point that out. I mean, there's 2 cases you can either kind of be on the sides of. You can say a Dare Manor, she's won really easily. We're not sure what she faced, but just looking at the way she's won these races, that kind of speaks to her talent. Then there's the other side of that. You could easily twist it and say, well, she's only faced Desert Dawn and Kirsten Bosch and these horses in her last several. Now she's going to face a more wide open group. But I do think it's an interesting field, as we've talked about from the pace perspective. And just touching upon Clairiere, I like that you pointed out last time out at Saratoga over the slop. She had nothing. It's a little bit of a question mark. We haven't seen her since that August 25th effort, but as you've also mentioned, she can certainly handle some of the best fillies and mares when she's at her best. So she's 4-1. I think in terms of this kicking off the sequence, it'll be interesting to see if she's close to those odds. Now, moving on to the Breeders' Cup Turf, race number 8 at Santa Anita. Love this event, 1.5 miles on the turf, a really nice field of 13 here. And I think just looking at this, obviously the Euros have come out in full force, Mike. Wide open event. I think this is almost a must spread race.
Yeah, I agree with you. Maybe one of the strongest contingents the Europeans have ever sent over for this race. I mean, it's one really good horse after another. So we'll see how everything plays out. I felt like it was, I don't know whether you agree with this or not, Ashley. I thought it was pretty hard to have a lot of confidence in the stateside based horses.
It is. And I think just looking at, we're just going to take a look at one replay here Up to the Mark is probably the horse that stands out the most, at least from the U.S. or North American-based horses. Todd Pletcher, Brad Ortiz, they've done well with this horse. Now, Jose was aboard in this performance that we're going to show, the Grade 1 Turf Mile at Keeneland. Uh, Ends up winning, keeps that win streak alive. But I think, Mike, the most impressive thing here is the stretch run. He didn't have any clear, sail down the stretch. He did have to work out a little bit of a trip, but once in the clear, he's able to get up just in time.
Yeah, that's good stuff there. Cutting back to a mile for that race too, after missing some time. I mean, there's just everything to like about that performance. Unfortunately for him, and he is a really good horse. And I think you're right. If you're going to use one of the Americans, it's probably him. But he's never been this far, and they are stepping him into a much tougher race. I mean, I feel like they could have easily just kept him at the mile and run him in the Breeders' Cup Mile. Maybe he would have had a better shot there. But listen, maybe they're just showing a lot of confidence in him here to run him against this field.
Maybe. I mean, the win two back, mile and a quarter, had some time off. Now just has that one race prepping for the Breeders' Cup Turf. But I agree. I think the Euros are certainly out in full force. Out of these European shippers, Mike, is there any one or a couple of them that really stood out to you?
Well, I mean, I feel like the 3-year-old for, Coolmore and O'Brien, August Rodin. I mean, I feel like he's got to be the one to start off with. He's a really good horse. There were a couple of clunkers on his card, but otherwise, his form's really, really good. I thought the number 2, one of the horses who could be a better price than here, Onesto. I think maybe that horse is a little underrated. I won't be surprised when he runs well.
Yeah, and he held up pretty well last time out at Longchamp to finish third. He only missed by just under 2 lengths in a big field, and we know he outran his odds. He was a long
Yeah,
shot in that field. But I agree. I do think when I started to look at some others, such as the 4, it comes off one of the career best performances, 107 Buyer, first win
right.
since 2021. I started to like this horse, and then I said, was that just a kind of a situation of a yielding turf course at Saratoga? That's what my mind gravitated towards. And I think going a mile and a half, a lot of these horses, they have not had the firm ground that they're likely to have on Saturday.
That's very true. You gotta take the ground into account as far as that 4 goes. Yeah, I mean, that race that he ran the last time we saw him, it certainly makes him fast enough to be a contender in here. We'll see if he can repeat it.
Moving on to the third leg in the sequence, race 9, mile and a quarter, Grade 1 Breeders' Cup Classic. And the big storyline now in here is the number 1 Arcangelo is scratched due to a foot issue, which leaves us with still a big field of 12. And Mike, there's the debate about the quality, and I think that's something that we just push aside here. But I think looking at the 12 in here, it's still a pretty wide open race.
Yeah, I think that's the good thing about it. Maybe you don't, have any, so-called superstars in this field, but it's a sort of a wide open race. I feel like you can make cases for a lot of different horses with Arcangelo coming out. Maybe that just makes the Baffert 3-year-old the 12 Arabian Night. Maybe he was the horse to beat anyway. Now he probably is the horse to beat. He'll go towards the front in the race. And he's still lightly raced enough to you feel like there could be another forward move coming for him. I mean, I think he's talented. I don't know that you necessarily have to take a short price on him, though.
I agree. I mean, obviously, we're looking at his Pacific Classic here. He stretched out to a mile and a quarter after finishing third in the Haskell. And he ends up doing this in gate to wire fashion, which certainly isn't easy at the distance. But I think it brings up a good point about his natural gate speed. He does have more of a outside post in here. He's going to move in one with the scratch of Arcangelo. But he has the early foot. We're talking about California, Santa Anita. Speed should probably serve him well.
His speed is supposed to be in play here, and maybe he's just fastest early. I mean, it kind of feels like the more you look at it, he's going to have to deal with Saudi Crown up front, you would think, at some point in this race. I mean, we'll see how fast this pace gets. If Saudi Crown goes, and that's what he's been doing in all of his races, and makes this pace a little bit fast, maybe it works against both those horses and opens up some opportunities for the others.
So if you're thinking maybe the pace could fall apart here and you're having horses that are going to come from off of it or maybe are just sitting off the heels of these two, what sort of horses are you going to look at in the Classic?
I'm kind of thinking, a horse like White Abario, who's obviously coming off of a really big win from the Quattro in the Whitney, which we'll look at here. This is just a really powerful performance. Yes, off of a good trip, maybe not a great field once Cody's Wish didn't really fire his best shot going this far, but I still think you have to be impressed with how this horse won this race. I don't know how short a price I'd want to take on him, Ashley. I think he's a major player in this race, though.
I do too. And I think, this is a horse that when you're looking back to last year as a 3-year-old, especially in South Florida, he got a lot of love. He got a lot of hype behind him. Then he sort of fell off the map for a little bit. He wasn't firing, or he'd have an okay race and then a poor race. But really, in his last three, you can't fault him. Even in the defeat two back, I think looking at the trip, maybe it just didn't suit him perfectly. But in some ways, I think it more or less came down to the start of the race, not the stretch run, because I do think he had some excuses later. So I agree. I think the Whitney, that's what he kind of needed to show to be in this spot. And I think coming off such a big performance, he makes sense. Other ones in here, though, obviously, Japan in recent years, they're not messing around. They're going to send out two horses in here. And out of the two, I think Ushba Tesoro is probably going to take more of the respect just based on what we've seen in the last two, especially in the Dubai World Cup.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, he seems like a serious contender in here. He's another horse who, probably wants a pace in front of him here, and, to give him his best chance to make that big run. But he's just pretty hard to knock at his overall form. I suspect he's going to be a big contender in this race. I actually feel like there are even some other horses. I know you and I sort of both agree on Zandon. He's a little bit interesting with an inside post. I also happen to be very interested in the number 13 Proxy. I know he hasn't won over this distance in his career, but his last two starts going a mile and a quarter, they're both really good performances, I think.
They are strong. And I think looking from a numbers perspective, he's kind of going back on the right track. And he's had some races where a little hit and miss. I'll be honest, I loved him in the Stephen Foster. Wasn't happy with the result by any means, but maybe he needed that race off that little bit of a freshening. And you touched upon Chad Brown's runner, Zandon. I love the way he's looked kind of leading up to the race and all the great coverage that all the different providers have put out there. But last time out in the grade 2 Woodward, did he hook that tough of a group? I don't think so, but I think this is a horse that after being repetitively second time and time out, he got a confidence boost that he sort of needed to get going. And the way that he won 104 Beyer speed figure, I think that's a positive sign. And Frankie Dettori coming to ride this one. It's an interesting move all the way around, which I didn't think, we've talked about this field. Regardless of what the opinions on the horses are individually, it is a very, very competitive Breeders' Cup Classic this year. So we'll move on to, we have two more legs to get to, a little bit different in terms of scheduling, but Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint is going to be the next leg that we'll take a look at. 5-ace on the turf course at Santa Anita. And this is a race where I felt like there were two options, Mike. You either spread or you can try to trim and go lighter here.
Yeah, I think you're right. I took the position of wanting to spread a little bit in here. We'll see how it all plays out. Generally, I'd like these 5 furlong turf sprints, man, I kind of, generally want to lean towards speed. I think speed really wins these races. We'll see how fast this pace gets, because I guess it could get fast. I kind of liked the 7 Nobles a little bit in this race. I just, I wonder, I love his turf sprint form. We'll see how fast this pace gets. But I definitely want to use him as the main speeds. And then I just sort of filled in some closing types with him.
Yeah, and talking about speed and just looking back to 2022, Caravel ended up defeating the boys in the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint. We'll take a look at her most recent effort. Now, it was against her female rivals in the grade 2 Franklin, but we hadn't seen her since that go at Saratoga over the soft ground, which she didn't really handle too well. But to me, this was an improvement and maybe a stepping stone to really get her prepped for tackling the boys once again. And she has speed, Mike, but she doesn't necessarily need the lead to win.
Yeah, that's very fair. I mean, she is a horse who will be forward, but if she doesn't make the lead, it's probably not a big deal here. I mean, I don't think she had a big excuse not to win there, but she certainly rebounded nicely off the poor effort at Saratoga, where it feels like she had an excuse. I'll be honest, I'm not way against her. I don't think you can be way against her in here, because she's good enough to win. I've just never really been a big fan and sort of wanted to use other horses.
Absolutely. And one other horse we'll touch upon really quick, the number 12, Arzak, who, interesting horse. I feel like he's getting a lot of love on social media, Mike, and a lot has to do with this performance series. The number 5, we'll show him here on the outside once he gets in the clear. He's going to kind of, run one of the best races of his life, at least as of recent. He gets a 101 Beyer speed figure for this performance. He wasn't too far off of it, but he had several rivals in front of him early, and he's going to be able to mow him down, albeit, though, at 5.5. The key with kind of pointing out this race this year, it's a solid 5 furlong distance. A lot of these horses are going to cut back a little bit.
It is, and it may not seem like a big difference, but even 5.5 to 5, it's a pretty big difference. So we'll see how Arzak handles that. I mean, I think you have to like his last 2 races quite a bit. I mean, he's a horse who felt like he could never win, or he would always run well, and he would never win leading up to his last 2. But the light bulb's gone off with this horse. His last 2 races are good.
So from the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint, we now turn to the final leg of the sequence, the Breeders' Cup Sprint, 6 furlongs, field of 9. Some big names in here, Mike, obviously more gravitating towards the outside, Gunite and Elite Power. Overall, your thoughts in here in terms of, was this a race you felt like you could go light, or were there several that you wanted to use?
Yeah, so I had two thoughts in here. I do think you can go light in this race, or at least that's how I looked at the race. My two thoughts were kind of, I think Elite Power. I have a lot of respect for Gunite, and I like his running style for this race. I feel like Elite Power is the better horse of the two. However, here's the replay of their most recent meeting in a Grade 1 up at Saratoga. This is going 7 furlongs, and it's going to be Gunite who finally gets a win over Elite Power here. But this pace was super slow for a Grade 1 going 7 furlongs. Gunite had all the best of it here. And I thought Elite Power was pretty badly compromised in this race. In a more fairly run race going 6, I think it plays to Elite Power's strengths. And I just think he's way the horse to beat in this race. And I really like him in here. I think he's the best horse in the field. My other opinion, that's the first opinion. I think Elite Power is the best horse. The other opinion is I think Speedboat Beach, the Baffert 3-year-old, and I get why people will like him. I think he's going to take a ton of money in there. And I don't really want any part of this horse.
Yeah, we're taking a look at his most recent effort where he's going to face a horse he's going to have to see against, Dr. Shivel, Dr. Shivel. I always say it wrong. But looking at these two, they're going to be the top two in here. They're going to duke it out in the end, and Speedboat Beach ends up being second. And I think you bring up a good point about this runner. I think he's going to take a lot of respect. Obviously, he got back to the dirt. He cut back in distance coming out of those turf races. But what's the price that you're willing to take on him? He's also been, pretty much managed out in California. And I agree. I think Elite Power is the horse to beat in here. He's rightfully 9-5 on the morning line. And the only thing I would say about Gunite, to kind of go back to those two, and when they met, I think it's an interesting move to see. Last time out, Gunite went to a mile at Parks on the slop and now cuts back in distance. It's always a move that I'm not sure what your thoughts on it are, Mike, but always thought that's interesting to go a little longer and then cut back as kind of your final race for the year.
Yeah, I actually generally like horses cutting back in these sprint races. And I think it's a good move for Gunite to point to this. I feel like earlier on, Asmussen was really thinking about running this horse in the dirt mile. And they sort of shifted gears in the last couple of weeks, and they've rerouted him to this race. And I do think it's the right move. And I will not be surprised when he's very competitive in here. I won't even be surprised if he winds up winning this race. But again, I feel like Elite Power is the better horse. So I sort of wanted to lean in that direction.
So that is the 5 races in the Saturday Pick 5 that gets kicked off in race number 7. Time to take a look at our tickets. And Mike, I think we kind of agreed on several of these races. For me, the key to spreading were the Classic and race number 8, the Breeders' Cup Turf. I really struggled to narrow it down, and I thought these were the races that if you like someone at a price, you had to toss them into your tickets. I think for me, it's can I get past the first leg in the sequence here. I'm only going to use 2 runners. Idiomatic, I think, has been very impressive. I decided to toss the Dare Manor. She was kind of the one that I was thinking about adding, just knowing that she absolutely flourishes over the Santa Anita surface. But I have some hopes for Clairiere. I'm hoping that she can go back to her former form that we saw earlier this year, where she was able to put away horses such as Secret Oath and some other nice horses, even Search Results, who she'll have to face again. So I really need to get out of this sequence and keep it alive after race number 7 and hopefully get some prices from there. But I went skinnier in the last 2. I think Elite Power is the horse to beat, but I also mentioned kind of the reason I like Gunite cutting back in distance. I didn't want to leave that one off. So for me, it's a $64 ticket, but excited to see your ticket as well. I think, we agreed on a lot of horses here, but I think in terms of how we spread, just a tad different.
A little bit, but yeah, I think we had the similar idea, right? I mean, we sort of bookended this thing going really narrow. I actually even went narrower than you did, but I think we both kind of just wanted to, lean on our opinions in the first and the last legs and then try to spread it out a little in between. I'm going to find out right away, whether I'm right or not here with singling Clairiere in the distaff. I feel like she deserves the chance to bounce back in here. And I get that there are some really, really talented mares in this race. And so maybe it'll be a tall order for her, but I just feel like some of those horses, they all kind of have a similar running style. And I still feel like some of them have a lot to prove in races like this, especially if they have to race early in this spot. And that seems like that's supposed to happen here. I think it plays to Clairiere's advantage. I really want to lean on her. I really want to lean on Elite Power, as I mentioned in the last, and I'm just going to sort of open this thing up in the middle and try and use as many horses as I can.
Very affordable ticket, $32. And if you can get through the opening leg, we can both hopefully get through with Clairiere. Maybe some smooth sailing for a couple of races until hopefully reaching the final leg, which is the Breeders' Cup Sprint. But a great card to bet on, lots of wagering opportunities. And if you're playing the Pick 5 on Saturday at Santa Anita, best of luck.